And now for our second panel, we will have Soledad Nuñez, Gabriela Lotta, Guillermo Toral, and Dapo Akande.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all, and welcome to this panel. As you see, the title of our panel is Living the Dream, ? Common struggles in the public sector and setting priorities for improvement. And we're going to be talking about, what is really at the heart of the mission of the Lemann program, and also at the heart of the mission for the school, which is how to make government better. The experience of people in the public sector, not just actually the experiences of, their work, but also how we can improve those experiences. One of the things that I think academics are very good at, and in fact, some might say that this is, particularly in the social sciences, some might say that this is all we do, is we highlight problems. We find problems, and we're very good at doing that. But what we're trying to do in this panel is not just to identify the problems, but also to see how we might be able to improve on those problems in the public sector. So thank you very much to Gabriela, to Soledad, and to Guillermo for joining us. Perhaps I might start with a question which follows on actually a little bit from the videos that we've just been watching, and this is a question to all three of you. In the videos that we've been watching with the MPP students, you see perhaps a common theme, in the sense that people go into the public sector with a great sense of mission, a sense of purpose, and then over time, the frustrations emerge, the problems that they face emerge. And I suppose the key question is, why is this so? Is this something which is unique to the public sector? Or is this just a function of, working in a large organization? And is this the type of thing that is likely to happen in any large organization? Maybe I will start with my two panelists who are online, and then I'll come to Gabriela. Perhaps I start with Soledad. What's been your experience of this?
Hi, Dapo. Good afternoon to everyone. It is so wonderful to be here and to have a chance to share my experience from being in public sector. That question actually is very, very important. I remember before entering the public service that I heard a lot from so many young professionals that enter government, that they were so frustrated. Listening to those stories, I think it was something very useful for me, because I started questioning, and as I started wondering, what is it with public service that is so that creates so much frustration in so many people? That was something helpful for me before entering government, because then I acknowledged that that was something that I needed to fight against. And why am I saying this? Because I think that sometimes we do not talk much about this. Because we are supposed to be, strong. We are supposed to be the ones that can solve problems. That happened to me after I left government, because I started feeling some sort of frustration. And it was hard for me to admit it, because I was supposed to be, strong women. I was young. If I say that I'm feeling frustrated, maybe people may believe that I am weak, So then I think it's very important to talk about these things in these kind of programs, to speak loud, to build the trust as well, to share our experiences. So then we can build resilience that we need in order to fight against maybe inertia. If we think about bureaucratic institutions and what is particular about government, I may say that fighting against the inertia as part of the culture, it is not easy, Every time you try to innovate, to propose something new, you just find the same answer, and it's not gonna work. We've tried this before, and you do not understand, maybe that's gonna work in private sector, but it's not what's gonna work in here. So that would be like my first thoughts, Dapo, about this wonderful question and these challenges that we have to fight against frustration as one of the main barriers to keep fighting and within government and changing things.
Thank you, Soledad. Guillermo, what do you think? Is this kind of trajectory somehow unique to the public sector, or do you think this is not just something we see in the public sector?
Thank you, Dapo, and thanks everybody. Very excited to be here. I do think there's something very special about the public sector that explains these kind of experiences that young people and senior people alike have in the government sector. I think there's two key things that are special about the public sector and that sort of explain these frustrations, but I'm going to argue that they also offer sort of an avenue for reformists like us. So first, like, I think it's important to remind ourselves that governments act precisely where markets would fail, right? It's precisely because market solutions to problems of education, healthcare, crime, defense, etc., would fail that we have governments, right? So because those market approaches, those market solutions that are well tested in the private sector would fail in the public arena, like a lot of those cut solutions that a lot of people that come with experience from the private sector or that have been educated in a culture where like market approaches to problems are receive wisdom, those will fail, right? And that's, I think, one key reason why we have a lot of frustration when people go into the public sector first. And the other reason, I think, is that governments have a lot of accountability institutions embedded in them, or accountability rules, constraints of all sorts, that as frustrating as they are and as problematic as they are, and a lot of my research is about how these institutions can be problematic, they're there for a good reason, right? So the problem is that we end up with organizations in the public sector that are really, really good at frustrating initiative, right? Or repressing creativity. So in a sense, I think like these two sources of the problem, the fact that governments are acting precisely in areas where markets would fail and where it's super important that we have public action, like again, the provision of education or security, and the fact that these governments are constrained, right? They have a lot more constraints than private sector organizations, and that's for good reason. I think that offers some ideas about how to move forward, especially in terms of a cultural switch, like a different way of looking at the problem, right? So in a sense, I think we need to think with more ingenuity about how to solve problems in the public sector, but without losing sight of these very two special characteristics of the government, of government organizations that create some of these problems, right? And I think the way going forward is really listening to the bureaucrats and making sure that like we empower the bureaucrats that often have the best ideas about how to move forward, right? So of course we need accountability, and of course we can't rely solely on market mechanisms, but we need to, I think, empower the bureaucrats who often are the ones who know best, the local actors who have the tacit knowledge and who often have the most creative ideas. We just need to ask them.
Thanks, Guillermo. I was just thinking, Gabriela, that we use the word bureaucrat or bureaucratic, and that has almost become a synonym for something is like, frustrating, it's slow, there are impediments. So again, for you as well, do you think this issue of from mission, purpose to frustration, is there something specific about the public sector or not?
Okay, first, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's an honor to be with all of you here. Guillermo just said almost everything I would respond to you with the same words I had written here, Guillermo. So this is a problem for me. But anyway, I would say that this is a very common trajectory coming from a lot of vocation and dreams and then becoming frustrated. It varies considering the places, the political moments, the age of the people. I think there are differences. We still have places inside governments where people can just see their dreams coming up. But I think that there are two issues that Guillermo said, one of them already, but there are two issues that are specific from the public sector that we have to address and understand to understand why this happens. The first one is about the structure of the public sector, and Guillermo just said the public sector has to have a lot of internal specificities to protect itself from any kind of political interference, for example. So all the characteristics, for example, that bureaucrats usually are complaining about in the Brazilian government, now they are saying, no, thanks God that we have this kind of instruments, because then the president cannot attack everything. So the same kinds of instrument that protects bureaucrats are instruments of constrainment for them. So I think that this is one of the dimensions that explains this trajectory. And the other one, I think it's about political alignment. And we don't usually talk about this because it's expected that bureaucrats are neutral. We expect bureaucrats not to have political values, but of course, everybody has political values, even bureaucrats. And of course, we have to take care about how to deal with them, not to become a problem because they are not elected. But for example, a lot of research showed that in some areas like human rights, environmental areas, bureaucrats decide to get into the government because they think that this is the best place to make the change they believe in. And then when they have a political alignment, they are really happy about the job. And then when they have political disalignment, this is also important to explain why they become frustrated. And this is very problematic again, because we are thinking about how to get accountability of someone that is not elected to be there, but of course he has dreams and he has projects and he believes in some kinds of policies that can be or not aligned with someone that was elected to design policies. So.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. We're going to stick with problems for the moment. I promise you we'll try and get to what some of the solutions might be, but arguably to try and get to those solutions, we need to have good analysis of what the problems are. And I think we've made a very good start. So let's stick with trying to identify what the problems are. You know, all of you have, you all have a lot of experience in dealing with specific problems and problems that are common across the public sector as well. And again, just going to each of you, and I'll be asking each of you to sort of identify the specific problems that you think are sort of like the most significant ones and which you have really identified in the public sector, and those which have, in your view, the sort of greatest impact on citizens. So again, I'll start with Soledad. Soledad, was housing minister, but with a background doing something else. Get a call out of the blue. Will you come into government? And you go into government from your background in engineering and as an NGO. And when you got into government, what did you think were the sort of biggest problems, the biggest challenges that you identified in the public sector?
Thanks, Dapo, for the question. Okay, first, I need to tell like a little bit my story. Even though I became the housing minister in Paraguay, I don't come from a political background. I am not affiliated to any political party. So I ended up being the minister. I still cannot explain. I didn't know the president. I didn't know his team. But somehow there was a huge housing crisis. I was leading this NGO, which is like very famous here in Paraguay. So I received a call. And without having experience in the public sector, I jumped from the NGO arena to the government. I remember the first day, one of my first struggles was with the extreme verticality of the structure within government. If I may compare it with the NGO sector, that we tend to decide things in a more like horizontal way, So having to deal with that hierarchy was very hard for me at the beginning, but at the same time, I tried to break it, I remember I sent an email to the 700 public servants the first week, telling them that I was just joining this team and that if we wanted to deliver results and to respond to society's demands, we needed to work together, And that kind of call is not normal within public sector. Maybe you find that kind of discourse a lot in the civil society sector. I didn't realize that I was going to receive about 300 responses and 50 of the public servants asked for a meeting with me. You know, we want to talk to you. We want to tell you about things that are not working within the institution. We want to have the opportunity to tell the minister, I've been working here for 30 years, but I haven't had that chance, you know. And that sort of change in the culture was key in order to achieve results in a short period of time. So I think that for me, one of the main challenges was that kind of culture. Of course, lack of trust and corruption as one of the main like diseases of a lot of public institutions in Latin America, but in the world, and was also a strong challenge to build an institution of integrity to convince the 80% that I call of the public servants that I needed to have on board in order to move forward the changes that we wanted to implement to renew the public policy sector related to housing and to implement like new projects to just move forward the institution. So I think that lack of trust was as well something that was not that was an enormous challenge. I remember a lot of public servants saying, every time a new minister comes, they come with new and wonderful ideas. But then time goes by, you know? So we don't believe that you're gonna keep thinking the same like in 1 or 2 years. And another thing was about a lot of public servants also believing that they will just stay, that, you know, that ministers just come and go, and bringing them on board was demanded a lot of time and effort, mainly the first year when the human talent strategy was something very key to move forward in the institution.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Soledad. I mean, you've obviously been looking at these problems from the perspective of a minister. And I know that both Gabriela and Guillermo have been looking at these issues from other perspectives. Maybe just to switch things up a bit, I'll come to Gabriela. What are the biggest challenges that you have seen in your own work with regard to, you know, the problems of the public sector? I know you've been doing research in the federal civil service in Brazil, lots of interviews. What has emerged from those interviews you've been doing?
Okay, I think we could spend the whole day talking about problems in the public sector, and I could talk about institutional problems, weak institutions, lack of resources, lack of accountability, but I would like to talk about two issues that are related to people, to bureaucrats, because I think they are really important. And as Guillermo mentioned before, and I had written this, we have to listen to bureaucrats to understand better what is going on. So one of them, I think that we have a lack of a diversity inside the bureaucracy, especially in mid-level and high-level bureaucracies. So if we want the government to do more equal policies, we should have more diversity inside the bureaucracy, because it's very hard for people with a very specific characteristic like black, white men in the high level of the government to make decisions for the indigenous people or for the poor people that live in very peripheral areas. So we should have more diversity inside the bureaucracy in order to make policies more inclusive. This is the first thing I would like to mention here. And we have, at least in Brazil, and I know that in other countries in Latin America also, we have inside the high level of the government, we are no representative at all. We are just reinforcing a kind of exclusion inside the government. And the second point I would like to address is about the connection with the bottom of the public services. I think that we have many problems in this, what we call as gap of implementation, because we design policies expecting them to get automatically implemented by when they get in the ground. And then when teachers do not teach what we expect them to do, when nurses do not do what we expect them to do, we just blame them, saying that they don't work well, they are not well trained. This is all that their problems. And actually, this disconnection is a fault of the high level of the government, because they are not listening both to citizens and to workers, to frontline workers. And then we are just reinforcing this idea that frontline workers do not work well, that citizens do not access the service because frontline workers don't want to implement services, and we are not using their experience to design better policies. So I think that another big problem that we should face is making this connection, listening from the bureaucrats that are at the front line of the services to improve our policy design.
I should have said that Gabriela is a professor at FGV in Sao Paulo, but she's currently a Lemann visiting fellow here at the school. And though I said we were going to be talking about problems, she's already going to the solution, already making government better in true Blavatnik fashion. So the reason I switched it around and went to you instead of Guillermo is because the last time he said the things you wanted to say. So now I'm going to see whether he's going to say that you've already said the things that he wants to say.
Let's see.
So Guillermo, I mean, same question to you, which is really about what are the main challenges that you have seen in your research, professor in the US at Vanderbilt University, but you've been doing work with sort of subnational governments in Brazil. What are the main challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, thank you, Dapo. So I am going to be building on some things that Gabriela and Soledad said. So yeah, my focus as a researcher has been a lot on municipal governments in Brazil, right? So municipal governments, like in many other parts of the world, tend to be a lot poorer, right? They tend to have much bigger financial constraints and just constraints on resources more broadly. So that's the number one complaint that I hear from both politicians and bureaucrats when I talk to them in the field. But I actually don't think that's the main constraint that we have going forward. Obviously, resources are super important, but when you look at the data, for instance, on student learning or infant mortality or other public services in healthcare or social assistance, you see that there's tons of variation in performance across municipal governments or across schools or across clinics that have the same amount of resources and serve equally deprived communities. So to me, that's super intriguing, right? Because it tells us that given a set amount of resources that can be determined by the economic situation or political alignment or you name it, but we typically can do a lot more, right? Most governments, most schools, most clinics are far from the frontier in what they can achieve with the resources that they have. And to me, that's very exciting because it sort of advances a policy agenda that's a lot more exciting and I think promising than thinking just solely about resources. So for me, if not resources, then what? Well, for me, the key constraints have to do with humans, with how humans work together in particular. And I'm thinking especially about two sides of this problem or these potential solution. One has to do with bureaucrats and teams of bureaucrats. And one of the MPP students in the video remarked about the importance of building teams, right? We often tend to assume, at least when it comes to services like education and healthcare, that these providers, these frontline workers are working behind closed doors on their own, but they're not. They're really embedded in teams of bureaucrats. And I think thinking about how best to arrange those teams, how to motivate those teams, and how to make those teams more oriented towards results, I think it's a promising avenue to solve some of those problems. And the other one has to do with connections between bureaucrats and politicians, right? Something that Soledad was mentioning and referring to based on her amazing experience. So, we cannot escape the fact that government organizations are led by politicians, and that's hugely important and hugely useful, actually. Like, we tend to think of politicians as a source of problems and headaches and misallocations and corruption. And, there's good reasons. Obviously, there are tons of cases where that is the case. But politicians can be an immense asset. And another one of the MPP students on the video mentioned how mayoral support had been key, right? Like political capital, it's a phenomenal resource to get things done in the public sector. And I think we need to think better about how that alignment between bureaucrats and politicians and sort of the kind of cultural switches that Soledad managed to install in the ministry, which no other actor in the ministry could have ever achieved, how we can foster those kind of changes and how can we best again, align, or how can we have politicians and bureaucrats work together? The problem is that recipes, like they're gonna have to be very context specific, right? And that's something that I see very frequently in these work with municipal governments in Brazil. Like we cannot just simply import things that worked in Singapore or in Korea 30 years ago. Like we need to think very carefully about what's different about that particular context and go beyond this toolkit of a few recipes that are often presented as like magic bullets when in fact they're not. And again, I'll go back to what I said before and that Gabriela was also mentioning, like the need to sort of foster innovation and sort of empowering the good bureaucrats, because there's a ton of great people in the government to do innovative work that's also accountable and results oriented.
Thank you. So I wanted to actually touch on something that all three of you have talked about, and Guillermo just mentioned it there. I think the way you described it was you talked about the connection between bureaucrats and politicians. And Soledad talked about it as well when she was talking about both the hierarchical structure in the ministry and then the fact that, you know, the bureaucrats sometimes think ministers come, ministers go. And Gabriela, you also mentioned it a bit actually in your opening response, but I know from the presentation you gave here at the school last week that this is something that you have been working on. So again, a question to all three of you, but I'll start with Gabriela in terms of what are the key challenges actually in making that connection work, or why is it that sometimes that connection doesn't work between the political class who are running the government and the bureaucrats who have to do the work of the government?
Okay, thanks for the question. I will answer it addressing specifically what I have been studying now in Brazil. So this relationship between politicians and bureaucrats can also be problematic. And I think this is just part of the game because politicians want to control and bureaucrats want to resist because they just want to do what they think it's right to do. I've just been talking about this before. So this relationship may always be complicated by both sides. But what we have been seeing now, not only in Brazil, but in many countries around the world, and that there's an agenda of scholars studying this, is that some politicians are starting to cross the line of political control using instruments that are not part of the democratic game to control bureaucrats or to gain their loyalty. And this is what I have been seeing in Brazil. As you mentioned, I've been doing this research we interviewed around 150 bureaucrats from the federal government that are on the resistance project. So they are against the president and they are trying to make resistance in different ways. And we have been studying the different instruments by which both the government learns how to do political control and bureaucrats learn how to resist to political control, both doing voice, making a public resistance, but also doing sabotage, shirking or exiting or doing other strategies that are less on the radar that nobody sees them. So, but what we have been seeing and we have been discussing this last week is that this specifically Brazilian government, but also other countries, the president is really good in improving the instruments of political control, making bureaucrats being afraid, more and more afraid about the resistance project. And when they can do this, when the president can do political control in this way, he is just able to make the changes he wants without any kind of accountability or any kind of legal resistance even. We have been talking about the uses of the law and the official procedures by both sides, and how the government is improving to use these instruments against the bureaucracy. So I think that this is a very specific element. Maybe Guillermo can also talk about how this happens in the municipal level, because in the municipal level, we have weak institutions, weaker, at least comparing to the federal ones. And of course, this makes political control easier, or it can make it easier. But I think there's a line we have to understand here when this political control becomes an authoritarian project. And this is what we are seeing right now in the federal government, Brazilian federal government.
I'm going to come to Soledad after Guillermo, because she will obviously bring the perspective of someone who has been working as a minister, but maybe go back to Guillermo and ask the question. I mean, you talked about a lack of alignment. You said, we should try to see alignment between the political class and the bureaucracy. So what are the challenges actually in getting that alignment, which you were saying that this is one of the key issues. How is that to be done?
Yeah. First, I think I misspoke. Like, I don't think we necessarily need political alignment. I have some work actually examining not just the cost, but also the benefits of political alignment between bureaucrats and politicians. And I think, there's interesting costs and benefits in that. I think I was using alignment to refer to our need to have bureaucrats and politicians work together, right? There are going to be different types of state actors. But if things are going to change, we need them to work together, right? And we often have this image of politicians as rent seekers, right? As villains, and we often have this image of the bureaucrats as the heroes. And I think there's definitely cases and images that sort of agree with those metaphors or those images, but there's many instances where that is not the case, where things are a lot more complicated. Some politicians are rent seekers, others are very interested in sort of improving public services. There's many that are in between and have both concerns, and similarly with bureaucrats, right? So how do we get those different actors to work together? I think Gabriela is talking about a very sort of difficult situation, right? Where we're talking about resistance to entrenchment and encroachment by a proto-authoritarian executive. But in general, like in more general situations, how do we deal about this issue of like the need to have bureaucrats and politicians work together? And again, I think that political selection and sort of the incentives for politicians are very important for us to think about if we care about what happens within the bureaucracy. So I have some work, for instance, looking at what happens when mayors lose the elections and looking at what happens to the bureaucracy in the interim between an electoral defeat and a new government coming into office, right? If we thought that politicians didn't matter or that politicians matter mostly for the bad, that interim period where like, de facto, yes, there's a mayor there, there's a government, but they're on their way out, should be a moment of performance and excellence, but it's not. We actually see that during that period, there's tons of hiring, so a lot of bureaucratic turnover, and this gets to the connections between political and bureaucratic turnover that Soledad was talking about earlier. But we also see pretty big declines in public service delivery, and in particular in the delivery of healthcare services, which are the most salient policy area at the local level in Brazil. So to me, that speaks to one, the importance of thinking about the connection between bureaucrats and politicians and the mechanism of turnover, but also thinking about how accountability upwards, right? Accountability to political leaders, at least to the extent that political leaders care about public service delivery, and obviously that's not always going to be the case. But to the extent that they do care, even if it's poorly, that accountability is key. And I think that's why we observe in this interim period, at least in Brazil, that an electoral defeat of the mayor leads to massive declines in the delivery of healthcare services. So I think we need to think harder about those connections and sort of try to go beyond these images of the bureaucrat or the politician as either the hero or the villain. They're likely a mix. Some of them are going to be in those poles, but most of them are going to be somewhere in between.
Okay, so coming to you now, Soledad. I mean, not a politician, but a minister who's occupying that position at that time. How did so you spoke about this issue of the hierarchy, and you spoke about this question of the relationship with the public sector workers. How were you able actually to sort of overcome this? Because in your job, your role actually is to get things done, and to get things done through the public, sector, through the civil servants who are working for you. So what lessons did you sort of learn from this?
It is wonderful to listen to Gabriela and to Guillermo from a research perspective, because everything they're saying, we tried to, put it on work while I was the minister of the housing ministry in Paraguay. Even though I am not affiliated to any political party, I was holding a political position. So I was a politician for bureaucrats, right? So listening to these advices, like listen to bureaucrats. We need to connect politicians with bureaucrats. I think that was a key element of success for us in a short amount of time. I share about the experience, just writing an email to the 700 public servants, but we also deployed a lot of strategies during the first year that was about bringing bringing the gap or connecting with every single bureaucrat within the institution. So we were like, one of our strategies was about focusing on people, even though it seems obvious. It was not that easy to understand when I got into the institution. So our focus on people was not only speaking about citizens outside the institution, but was mainly speaking about people within the institution, trying to motivate them. Motivation is something very, very key and essential in public service. And we realized that so many public servants that were there for so many years, 20, 25 years, they have lost motivation. They have lost the sense of the mission of the institution, and that, of course, was reflected in productivity, in the capacity to reach results, and so on. So focusing on people was something key. Also building the right teams and bringing the right people in the right place at the right time. So something we've done, for example, was to build interdisciplinary teams, selecting people from different departments and putting them to work in 3 different teams. One of them I called the team of the past. So I selected a couple of public servants from different departments, and I told them, your mission is to understand what has happened in the past in this institution. So you need to solve the problems we are sorry if I go Spanglish, heredando. How do you say heredando? It's like that we are getting now. Yeah, exactly. So, and this is your mission. Then I built another team for the present, where I put a lot of my energy on. You need to find the quick wins, the quick reforms that can rebuild trust with citizens, that can build a new narrative and share it with the public opinion to show that we are in a different path, building a different institution. So that was the biggest team. And also it was interdisciplinary from different departments. And then the team for the future. To that team, I used to tell them, you need to dream about the institution that we want to become. You need to build the huge reforms, the ones that are gonna take longer. You're gonna need to fight against inertia. You need to innovate. You need to be creative. So they had no boundaries. You can propose anything that comes to your mind to change the institution. So that team worked in the first housing policy for Paraguay. They worked with local governments. They changed laws. They did a lot of reforms that were very useful for sustainability of the changes that we were moving forward. So I think that building the right teams, focusing on people, and realizing that if we talk about building better institutions, we need to acknowledge that institutions are built by people, so there are a lot of bureaucrats that are not the same. I mean, there's a lot of it's very heterogeneous. It's not the same bureaucrats. It's not equal as their the bureaucrat next door. You know. So, and just to end because I'm sharing like my story and my experience. Something we found out at the end of our period, because we did a whole analysis with we hired like professionals to do this thing. They develop a lot of service inside the institution, and the thing that we heard the most from public servants was that it was the first time that they felt connected to the mission of the institution, and that was the main reason why they changed their behavior, the way they work, the energy they deploy, everything they've done to change the institution. So it was not about me, it was just about the people in the institution, you know.
Thank you. Okay, so Gabriela and Guillermo are going to be running workshops with MPP students, or have you done yours? Yeah, no. Not yet. Okay, so they're going to be running workshops with the MPP students on some of these questions that we're talking about, overcoming problems in the public sector and how to overcome them. So let me start with Guillermo to give us a preview of some of the things that you expect to be talking about in those workshops.
Yeah, so a key feature of all government projects and government activities and efforts at changing the public sector, at least in democratic settings, is that we have this interplay between the bureaucracy, which is, you know, typically an actor, an institution with more long-term goals and definitely more stability, and elections, right? And again, there's very good reasons to have electoral accountability. We believe, and rightly so, that they help us sort of keep governments accountable. But we have these regular shocks, right, to the public sector that come every 4 or 5, 6 years with electoral accountability. And that changes a lot of things, not just in Brazil, but all around the world in how the bureaucracy works and what it gets done and what it doesn't get done, right? So my workshop is going to be focused on what I call political bureaucratic cycles, and that is cycles caused by elections in both the composition of the bureaucracy and whatever the bureaucracy gets done. So I have some work looking at sort of firing and dismissals of bureaucrats around elections in Brazil at the local government, but also at the delivery of public services. So I'm interested in bringing together students with public sector experience to talk about that connection between elections and the public sector, and in particular electoral cycles in the composition and especially the performance of the bureaucracy, and think about ways in which we can address those cycles. I have some insights that I'll bring from my research and my review of the literature, but I'm sure, and I'm very excited to hear about students' experiences and perspectives in their own sectors and in their own countries about that connection and how we can solve it. I think it's a really hard, but a really important problem for governments all around the world.
And Gabriela, what are the insights that you expect to come out of your workshops? Okay,
so we are discussing this cycle again about frustration and vocation and frustration, but focusing on street level workers or frontline workers during a crisis. So the idea is to discuss how to manage people that are at the front line of the services during crises as this one of the pandemic, and how to deal with their vocation, their fear, or all of the emotions that comes during a crisis as this one. So we are discussing 4 real cases that I collected during the pandemic with different kinds of bureaucrats, a teacher, a social worker, a health worker, and public defenders that had very difficult situations and challenges to make a decision. And this decision was based on their vocation, but at the same time, they could not make this kind of decision easily. So we are discussing how to manage situations like this, in which people have to make decisions. They want to make one kind of decision, and this can be a problem for the outcome of the policy. So that's it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give Soledad the last word, but I'm very conscious that Guillermo has to leave. He has to go and teach. So unfortunately, he won't be with us for the Q&A to follow. So whenever you need to leave, Guillermo, you can leave. But thank you so much for taking part. And just to go back to Soledad before we then have a Q&A with those of you in the room and those on Zoom, you've already told us a number of things that you found, Soledad, to be really important in sort of shifting the culture. I don't know if there's one highlight or one key message that you would like to sort of leave everybody with in terms of how to go about in shifting the culture in the public sector, maybe one thing that you think is the most important thing.
I will repeat what I already said in that sense, Dapo, that I think everything is about people, you know. But sometimes we say it, you know, but we don't know how to really do it in the ground, you know. And small things, just like organizing, for example, like participatory meetings, so public servants, so bureaucrats can decide on what's gonna be the next projects that the ministry are gonna to develop, and was very important for us, you know. And for example, I like organizing meetings and to share what were our main achievements to bureaucrats, because I you know, as a minister, you have like a lot of stakeholders you need to respond to. You know, you have like the public opinion, you have other politicians, you have the president, you have a lot of people, you know. But sometimes politicians or ministers tend to forget bureaucrats, you know. So we organize this kind of report and meetings that I would just sit in the middle of a huge room with bureaucrats, just telling them our achievements, our failures, our challenges, you know, and having a discussion on how we can overcome the barriers that we were finding. So I was surprised. I have to share something with you, you know. When I said yes to become like the housing minister, I was very skeptical and maybe cynical about the possibility of making real change within government. I just thought that it was worthwhile to try. So I said yes because, I don't know, I have like courage, I like challenges, I wanted to fight against the system. But then the whole process of being in public, of being in government, changed the way I see public service, the way I see bureaucrats. You know, I realized that it's not, and it's not, and it's not usually as we see or as we look like from outside, and everything was about people. You know, having conversations, connecting, listening. And that was the main recipe to achieve a huge amount of results that were not even in the mind of a lot of citizens here in Paraguay. It was not enough, of course. There is still a lot of housing deficits. There's a lot to be done in the housing sector in Paraguay, but we were able to win the, if I may say, the minds and hearts of the bureaucrats, and we all together were able to change the institution. You know.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to the three of you. So now we're going to move to question and answer time. And thanks very much, Guillermo. Yes. So if there are questions here in the room, I'll call you and you can ask your question. For those of you who are online, if you want, you can type in the chat. Or if you indicate, we can also have you ask your question. So starting here in the room, yes, Luis.
Thank you for this very interesting talk. And my name is Guillermo, I'm from Brazil. And one point that Gabriela mentioned that called a lot of my attention, and I think it relates with this point of everything is about people. And I usually don't hear that about the bureaucratic systems, is the lack of diversity. And because without diversity, you don't reflect the society you're representing. You see a lot of that in the political system, the private sector, but not in the bureaucracy. So I would like your take on, both of you takes on what affirmative actions can we do in the bureaucracy to increase diversity?
This is a very good question. Guillermo, just first to say for you that are studying right now, there's a big discussion about this in the literature, named representative bureaucracy. So this is not something I am creating right now, okay? And there are theoretical discussions and experiments about the outcomes of making diversity inside the bureaucracy. So we we can use different kinds of instruments. Some of them are related to the political dimension of how to bring people inside. For example, if you say, we don't have this kind of discussion in Brazil, but we could have, the ministers have to be representative. So 50% of ministers have to be women, 50% men. So you can make the appointees, the political appointees, be more diversity, and this has to do with political decisions, but also changing rules. But inside the bureaucracy, we have many instruments, and Brazil adopts some of them. For example, the quotas to public in the concursos, in the public, to get into the public service. We have quotas for gender, we have quotas for disabled people. Disabled, is this right? Disabled people. We have quotas for race. So we can adopt this kind of instruments in order to push to change to force the change of the bureaucracy from inside. But something that is very important, the bureaucracy, especially in Brazil, I don't know in other places, but in Brazil, if we compare the levels, in the high level, we have white men, and in the street level bureaucrats, we have women, most of them women, and there's a good diversity in races in the street level. So, but street level workers receive less money, the worse wages, they are less educated, and they don't have power. So it's much more about thinking about the diversity in the power positions, not only in the bureaucrats that implement policies, because there we have much more diversity than the other levels. So.
Soledad?
Yeah, I think this question brings like the conversation to public service reforms as well. At least in Paraguay, we are like discussing how we build the bureaucracy, you know, who's gonna work for the government? How do we select? How does the government select the people who's gonna work for the ministries? And who are they? You know, how do we build this sort of diversity, of course, which we agree, which is gonna be something essential to develop, design, and implement the right policies to solve the problems of citizens. In Paraguay, we have as well this kind of quotas. And I remember when I came to the ministry, for example, speaking about people with disabilities, that was there is a quota in the law, but it was not implemented in the ministry. So we developed the first concurso, the first process of hiring people based on the law, and it was like a huge like attention, you know, that was put on that decision. And then started also bringing the conversation to who else. I mean, if we speak about quotas, and we're gonna have quotas. So, and who's gonna be part of this policy, you know? So I think that's answering like the question. Maybe that is one specific and proactive action that can be done. And I agree with Gabriela. And then speaking about just thinking about like public service reforms in a broader way, maybe, you know.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we go online if we've got a question online.
Yeah, we have a question from Circe Monteiro. She writes, one of the greatest frustrations of working in the public sector is the discontinuation of projects due to the alternance of political power. Long-term planning is quite impossible to achieve in most local governments because of the shift in political views. But the partnership with academic institutions have somehow created a sense of wider legitimacy and the articulation of partners in these bottom-up projects. But how do you foster the permanence of multidisciplinary teams that collaborate with the public sector in capacity building?
Maybe she can.
Maybe. Soledad, do you want to take that one first?
I was just, you know, reading the question, and I totally agree about the frustration. And I'm speaking as a minister, you know, after we switched government, of course, and a couple of projects that we were moving forward were just discharged by the new administration, you know, and that was something that we we knew from the beginning that was a risk. We tried to overcome or to manage that risk, not bringing the academic institution, but civil society organization. And in some projects, that action was key, because when the new administration said, because of ego reasons or because of political reasons or whatever, that the project was not gonna to continue, these civil society NGOs were the one, like asking for a meeting with the president, just asking for a meeting with the minister and saying, this is not about, the former ministers, this is not about the former administration, this is something that we all build together. So I think that bringing third parties, actors to the table when they designing and implementing public policies, and can be a way of overcoming this discontinuation of projects due to the alternance of political power, which is something very common in Paraguay. And by reading this question, I may guess that it's the same in Brazil,
Okay, any more questions in the room? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a student at the MPP and MGPP and FGV and also at Bocconi. I feel we have a huge challenge listening to you, that in order to make bureaucracy more effective, diverse, human-centered, and also in this relationship between the bureaucrats and the politicians. And I would like to hear from you if you feel the way forward is through a huge reform, as we've been discussing in Brazil for some time now, or more in a permanent base of adjustment, of constant adjustments. Because the perception that I feel is that when we talk about promoting adjustments in the bureaucratic level, we face resistance from the bureaucracy itself. So from the corporativism, to say so, of the civil servants, also from the politicians, but also from the public opinion. So when we try to promote adjustments to make it more effective, to promote incentives based on performance, the public opinion also have resistance on that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what do you think is the way forward, and how to also engage all these stakeholders so that we can make the adjustments we need. So I would like to hear from you.
Okay, I just published a small article with Chico Gaetani and Alqueta Petti, and we were just arguing, we don't need a reform. We need small changes over time, because 90% of the problems we have in the government are about management and not about changing the law or changing the constitutions. For example, if we want to improve evaluation, that's not about having a law saying we have to evaluate. It's about having a real process of evaluation with consequences, with people educated to do good evaluation. So I think that most of the problems we have are problems of management, and we just change these problems incrementally, because in 2 years we will have new problems that we didn't have before, and we cannot have a new reform every 2 years or even every 10 years. Of course, we need some legal changes, and Vera Monteiro, that is here, she's working in some of them. For example, we need to change the law about civil servants, how to hire them, the laws about the careers. We need to change some laws, but the big changes we need to do are about changing practices of management. And this has much more to do with educating people, with training them, with selecting better, with creating small processes of managing them, than about reform. So I really don't, I think that reforms create big problems. They are usually not, we start with a big reform and we end with a very small one. And the small one creates a lot of frustration and a lot of resistance that we could just solve problems listening to people and making agreements about what we can change in our practices. So I really don't believe in big reforms.
Soledad, what about you? Big reforms, small changes? What would you say?
I think I'm gonna give maybe like the easiest answer. Like, I think we should. It depends on the context. It depends if we are speaking about, like national government, or we're speaking about local governments. if we're speaking about, Paraguay, Brazil, Mexico, every single country has like its own history and situation. And for instance, in Paraguay, we lack a lot of legal structures. If we speak about public service, not much is written. So in our case in Paraguay, we need like something, at least in my opinion, and speaking about big reforms, we need like a public service reform. But when we the question is, how do we make a big reform work? And because if it's gonna be designed just between doors and among just a couple of politicians, it's not gonna work. But if you bring like the right stakeholders and also like those who we can say are part of the elite of the country, like the academia, then the ones that can change the course of history, but we bring them to the table and we agree in some like minimums that must be part of the social contract. I flagged those agreements and among individuals in a society in a reform. It must be written, in that way. I totally agree with Gabriela that a lot of problems that we have in governments are about problems of management. There are about small practices that we need to change. So I think that making small adjustments and is also something that can be more effective in the short term, but we should not stop thinking about the reforms that we also need in our countries, because the way maybe our constitutions are designed, the way our laws are designed, the way our judiciary system is designed, and which are gonna need like big reforms. It must be also like a theme of discussion, because otherwise we also may lose like the perspective of these huge changes that our society needs, So making the summary, I think both things we should look at small adjustments and also not stop thinking about the reforms that we need.
I suppose the other thing that occurs to me is that it depends on what one regards as a big reform. There's also the categorization question. And that reminds me of a story, a very Oxford story, which permit me to say, so somebody was asking the head of one of the colleges here in Oxford, how many sort of different types of fellows do you have in your community? And the head of the college leaned over and said, do you mean before or after the big reform? Okay, after. And then the guy said 17. And how many did you have before the big reform? 18. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. I'm a student here. My name is Alan at the MPB, and I would like to build on this question actually. So considering it's a big reform or just like incremental changes, what would be the priorities that you see? And I would like to hear from both of you in Paraguay and Brazil that we could already start doing, or that you've seen throughout these last couple of months that is really interesting, so that we can understand better what you mean by these improvements that we can already do without the legal changes. Because in Brazil, at least when we know how it works, it is really difficult because everything is quite connected. So when you discuss career, you discuss like salaries and how the structure works. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more of what is in your minds when you consider these important priorities.
Okay, I will be really brief about this, but then we can talk more later. I'm always talking all the time. I answer about what I think should be the changes in Brazil. I think about 4 main issues that, again, they don't should be one big law changing everything big, because this will not work. But we need small changes in these 4 issues. So the first one is about how we manage people. There's no doubt here, we have to change some practices of evaluation, of hiring, of training, of careers. We have big problems around this. No doubt that we should invest in managing better our civil servants. The second main issue, I think we have a big problem, and I know this is not only about Brazil, this is a problem in many countries, that is all the structure of the public sector is organized to make, to separate the sectors. So we have a lack of integration. This creates problems about how to solve complex problems if each of the sectors are working with them separately. We can think about any, like poorness. How do we solve poorness? Poorness is a problem of hunger, is a problem of money. So, and each ministry works with it in a different ways. And then we don't have efficiency. We don't have effectiveness. So we need to address problems of the structure. And this means, again, changing the careers, making careers that could be integrated and could circulate, like we have some of them in Brazil. This means changing the budget allocation, because the budget reinforces sectoriality. This means changing the processes of organizing procedures to be integrated. So this is the second main area I think we should improve. The third one is about, I should not say this, but I will say this. We have a huge problem in Brazil about the relationship between the systems, the control systems, and the executive. We have in Brazil what Chico Gaetani calls the, I don't know this in English, sorry, someone can translate, apagão das canetas. People is just leaving the pens. No one wants to sign anything anymore because everybody is afraid of the consequences of the system of control. So we are not making decisions. We are not implementing policies because everybody is afraid. And the system of control is most of the time reactive. Of course, we have many nice things going on. Of course, we need control. I'm not questioning this, but the integration between the control and the decisions should be something we should address. When does the system, the control system gets in touch with the policy? This is something we really should address because we have many problems. And then the fourth one, the last one, is about the integration of the public administration, all the organizations, and the non-state sector that provides services. That in Brazil are the NGOs, but it can be different kinds of organizations. So what happens is that we have been, since the 90s, contracting organizations to provide services. Okay about this, we can discuss if it's good or not. This is not the point. The point is, we are not managing well this relationship. We should manage better because if we don't, then we can of course have corruption, but this is not the main problem I'm addressing here. The problem is that the state is not making directions about what he wants with the policies, and the decisions come from these organizations that are contracted to provide a public service. And of course, this can create a lot of problems. We should have changes in this relationship because of course, it's not fair if you go to a health clinic that is managed by one organization and I go to another clinic. Both are from the public health system, but they are managed by different organizations. We cannot be treated differently because the organization wants to. This is a public service in a country, for example, that has equal rights for everyone. So, and then the state should be able to make this management better. So I think that these are the 4 areas I think we should have changes. Some of them are law changes in legal systems. Some of them are changes in practices. Some of them are changes in people. But I think that these are the main areas. And our reform does not attack any of them. Okay, just to make it clear, because in Brazil we have right now a reform being discussed and it does not improve any of these areas. It only talks a little bit about managing people, but it's not good. Even in this area. So.
And Soledad, maybe the same question to you. I think you want specifics.
I agree with many things that Gabriela just said about like thinking the right way to build the structure of government to solve the problems that public policy should solve. I think it's a key question. I agree that that like dividing the ministries by sector sometimes just give more barriers to overcome, for example, poverty or that kind of thing. But I would say, like, but referring to the situation here in Paraguay, that because here we have like a very strong clientelistic network. So we do not have a strong bureaucracy which is independent from political power. So separating the careers of politicians from the careers of public servants is something that is I mean, every time I speak about the changes or the adjustments that we need here in Paraguay, I speak about creating an independent bureaucracy. Maybe it's very idealistic to think that it's gonna be like, you know, really like 100% independent, because I think Gabriela also said something like this before, that we have like political views, you know, we have like political intentions, but here in Paraguay, the patronage, the clientelistic networks are so strong that if we do not change that immediately, it's gonna be very difficult to improve in the quality of the public services that or public policies that are implemented here in the country. And then we can also like speak about like a lot of things and related to our democratic institutions and how we conceive, for example, the separation of power or the independence or the independence or interdependence among the different branches of government, which is beautiful when you read the laws and when you read the constitution, but it doesn't happen in practice. So I think that here in Paraguay as well, we need like a review or a change in the way the judiciary or the judicial system is built in order to build independence and separation of power, which is not happening in practice.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking at Anna. Do we keep going, or just looking at the time?
Questions online. I have questions.
Okay, there are a few questions in the room. If I go to, yes.
I'm Isabel, student at the MPP. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations for the initiative. Just building on what Gabriela just said, I wanted to maybe discuss a little bit more the idea of international governments and multilateral organizations and how they usually work with governments in Brazil and in many other countries, because there are many opportunities in which there is an interest in a cooperation project, but sometimes the design is made in London or in Berlin, or I mean in the States, and then it comes and it is presented right to the bureaucracies. And what I have seen is that there's not necessarily much counter argument on the way things should be designed. And obviously these projects are aligned with the foreign policy of the countries, and the funding can be interrupted and projects can be discontinued. In the meantime, there's a lot we can actually learn from other countries and other bureaucracies. So I don't see this relationship as black, white, good or bad, but I'm very interested in asking, how can we make the most of this, of potential partnerships in a way that working with international governments and multilateral organizations can actually build state capability for the long term. Thank you.
Should I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm not a specialist in international relationships, so I'm going to answer considering the perspective of the bureaucracy. So there's this discussion about policy diffusion. I don't know if you heard about it. So one of the things that is discussed is about how these international policies should be designed in order to countries or even municipalities be able to adapt them and translate them to local needs. But in order to do this, we need a previous capacity of the bureaucracy. And this is the same problem if we think about national policies implemented by municipal level, okay? This is not only about international policies. I mean, if the local bureaucracy has no capacities of translating, the bureaucracy does not understand the context, is not able to make this kind of adaptation, we are just implementing things that we know will have no effectiveness. So this is a big problem. But at the same time, I would like to address another thing, and I'm just just saying that I agree with you. It's very important that governments have capacities in order to be able to translate, because with no translations in a very heterogeneous country and diverse and unequal as Brazil, we are just reproducing problems if we don't do this. But there's another thing I would like to say, that's something that is coming from my research right now. Because what bureaucrats are doing right now, they are trying to find partners who can save them or protect them somehow. Academia is one of them, press is another one, but these international organizations are very important right now to protect bureaucrats. I will give you one example. We have in Brazil the National Statistic Office, the IBGE, and IBGE all the time, and it suffered a lot. The president tried to interfere many times, the president and the minister in the IBGE, in the Censo, in many types of research. And every time someone tries to change something, they just call FME, they call Soledad, they call any kind of international partner, say, please call the government and say that they cannot do this because our statistics are guaranteed by international relationship. So this kind of relationship became a form of protection to maintain some practices and some procedures that the government wants to change. Just to bring another perspective that it was not in my mind before these interviews, but now it's so obvious for me. They are all the time trying to receive protection from abroad, and then the international relations are really important for this kind of thing.
And Soledad, in your experience, what has that relationship been like between international organizations and the bureaucracy? Because the questioner sort of puts the tension there in the sense that you have things that come from international organizations not designed for local conditions, but at the same time, very often you need assistance from international organizations.
Yeah, I mean, in our experience, we work a lot with a couple of international organizations, and they were key on one hand because they were able to bring, like, you know, international experiences. So we were able to learn from things that work or things that didn't work in the past in some other countries in different contexts, but that could be useful information for us. But then I think that you need like a strong bureaucracy, and that's why you need like the right people in the right place, because of course you feel the tension sometimes from international organizations that they want to tell you what to do, you know, but they come from a different experience and they have like a different perspective of what is happening in the country. But at the moment that you sit on the table and you say, listen, you know, this, I know that this may have worked like in Mexico, but things in Paraguay are happening this way, and then you come to the table with data and you come with information and with evidence, then I think that good things can just, you know, emerge from that kind of relationship. For us, it was very productive working with different international organizations, but I agree, and I've acknowledged, and I've been through also that tension that sometimes is created by an outside actor that wants to implement policies that are not the right policies for the country. And it happened a lot, I may say, with you know, like international organization with funding, you know. So they have like money, so sometimes it's like, I'm gonna fund this project, so I'm gonna say what's gonna work, and then you need just the right bureaucrats with the information to just have like a strong conversation about the way public policy is gonna be done in the country, I think.
Okay, thank you. I think we do have time for one more question. Yeah, right.
Hi, I loved what you said, Gabriela, about how we need better management within the public service. And I was wondering if you could cite some initiatives that could work in this sense. What is it that we are supposed to do as a country? Should we hire a consultancy to implement some management? Like, what are the initiatives? And also, how could politicians get involved in these initiatives? Because the legislative now is trying to implement a reform that, like you said, doesn't really address the problem. So how could elected politicians help in this process that doesn't include a reform, but could also improve management? Thank you.
This is a really hard question. First of all, I don't think that we can consider that Brazil right now is in a normal way. So, I mean, everything I'm saying is just not for now, it's for the future, you know, or for the past. Because it's really, for example, how to have partnership with the politicians right now to implement this kind of agenda. I don't think we have space for this right now. So the idea is now we just postpone and we see later what we can do about it, because it's a really hard moment. We can just open the box and we don't know what is coming from it. So, and actually, I think that we are now fighting for democracy. We're not fighting for management. We're fighting for democracy, and this is big enough right now. So, but thinking about the future, I think that we have to learn from the experiences we have in Brazil. We have many really nice experiences that were implemented before, transforming the practices of management. So we have the central bank, we have TCU, we have the ENAP that made some changes. We had a very, very nice experience that now is dead, but it was really nice. In 2005, I don't know if you heard about it, the INSS is the national security system. So they did a big reform and they decided that should not hire any consultancy to do it. So they did an internal selection process to discover who is very good here to make strategic planning, who is very good here to make systems. And then they brought people from inside the organizations to be consultancies in this process of transforming the organization. So I think that we should learn from what we have inside. There's no magic solution. There's not bringing a big consultancy, everything will be changed. Of course, consultancies can be very good because they bring something from outside. But I think that we should invest in processes that are incremental and learn from what we had before. And we have very, very nice cases in the past. Some of them died, but we can learn from the experience and wait for better times to implement them again. So.
Okay, I would have liked to give Soledad the final word, but I'm also looking at the clock. And so maybe I should actually hand back to Anna, just looking at the clock. But before I do that, let me just say huge thanks to Gabriela, to Soledad, and also, of course, to Guillermo, who had to leave us. Thank you for all your insights, identified problems, but also came up with lots of solutions. And thank you to all of you for all the many questions and comments.
I just want to add my thanks to the panelists. Gabriela, as Dapo said, who's the Lemann Fellow at the moment here in the Blavatnik School. Soledad, who we should just say, used to be my student. And the reason that we ended up writing a case study based on her experiences is I was trying to teach a politics class, a seminar, and I asked her to give a 5-minute presentation, and it was so good. And it was such a detailed exploration of the theory we were trying to teach without having heavy theory in it. I just said, look, it's all yours. You take the class. So thank you, Soledad. And that's the first case we developed within the new Lemann Foundation Programme. Thank you, Dapo. I know you're a very, very busy and important man right now, so much appreciated. And also thank you to the students who put together those videos for just before then. So Alan, Marielle, Alvaro, and Lucia. Yeah, thank you so much. Now, we were going to have a party. We're not allowed to have a party. Thank you, Carlos, for trying to help to get the party going. We'll have a party soon, next time, and we'll look forward to the band playing then, Unlikely Coalitions, to give you a bit of a plug for next time. So I also just want to say, before I tell you what we're doing next, thank you to the teams who have worked behind the scenes. There's actually an awful lot going on behind the scenes to pull this together. I know, I want to say, Fred, hi in there. Thank you so much. Sam as well. Fred has worked very hard. The comms team, not just in the school, but at Lemann as well. Thank you so much. The events team, so many different teams. And most of all, I can just say to the Lemann Foundation Programme team, Bia, I know how much you've been running around to photo booths and all sorts, which is not normally what a postdoc is supposed to do. To Pedro, you're here to do a PhD and you're head of vital strategies in Brazil. Thank you for manning the Zoom. You're so overqualified for it. And most of all, to JP and especially Leah, who have worked really hard to pull off this event. And it's tough to join a program, get a new job. And I'm like, guys, in a month, this is what we're doing. So thank you so much for working so, so hard. This is just the beginning, the first event of many where we're going to see you back here. Now, we can't have a party, but I am going to inform you without expectation or saying the wrong thing that myself and the rest of the team are going to go to the Royal Oak pub, which is on Woodstock Road. It's about a 2-3 minute walk, and it's not the most scenic of walks, I apologize. We basically go that way, past a large car park and to the other side of the maths department. If you look on Google Maps, you'll find Woodstock Road. You basically, where we are now, equivalent, but the other side of the road. Thank you so much for coming in person and online. It's wonderful to see you here, and I look forward to being in touch in the future.
Thank you, Anna.